As the Battle of Leyte Gulf is winding down, General MacArthur has waded ashore and makes a radio broadcast to the Philippine nation saying, I have returned. In the name of your God, in the name of your country, in the name of your honored dead, rise up and strike. Strike the Japanese. The Philippines erupt in a series of rebellions, and Filipino resistance fighters, along with some Americans that have been part of the Filipino resistance since 1941, also begin preparing the way to help American troops. But off the shore, as the Japanese battleships sail away because of the panic of their admiral, for the first time, Americans encounter something purposeful and evil. Kamikaze. Kamikaze is from Japanese Shinto. A kami is a divine spirit, K-A-M-I. Kaze is a strong wind. The kamikaze is the divine wind. Twice, late in Mongol times, the Emperor Kublai Khan of the Mongol Empire ordered the destruction and conquest of Japan. On both occasions, the Mongol invasion fleet was destroyed by typhoons, which are super hurricanes that plague the Western Pacific. These typhoons are terrible. You take a hurricane like Katrina or Sandy and multiply it, and you have a typhoon. Well, these Mongol fleets were destroyed by typhoons. It was one of the things that give Japanese a belief that the gods have special love for Japan and the Japanese home islands and will protect them. But you can't just assume that kamikaze is a literal typhoon. A group within the Japanese armed forces knows that since Midway, Japan has not been able to fight and win the war. So why does Japan fight? Because Japan, like many of our enemies, have calculated that Americans are soft and weak, and that if you kill enough Americans, we will go away. If you kill enough Americans, if you make it hard for America to win the war, we'll just go away. So that is why these islands are being defended so fiercely. Because if the Japanese can make Americans spill blood, spend blood for every square inch of territory that they recover from the Japanese Empire, they're going to calculate after a while that it's not worth it, and they will have a negotiated peace. A negotiated peace is a peace between basically equals, and the Japanese can claim a kind of spiritual victory, and they can keep their God Emperor, which is the whole purpose of it all. To keep the God Emperor. So the Japanese are fighting like crazy. But that still gives the Americans too much initiative, and the power of their navy is so overwhelming that a lot of the Japanese who are there to kill Americans as they die are being killed before Americans come ashore. So, a new corps, the Kamikaze Corps, is recruited. And these kamikaze learn to take off in old rickety aircraft, and they learn to fly and navigate these aircraft. They sort of learn to land, but it's not really that important. Because the kamikaze are trained for a special mission. To be the living computer of a manned guided missile. You fill the plane with fuel and explosives, and even an old plane can do a job. What Americans began noticing at the very tail end of the Battle of Leyte Gulf is whole groups of Japanese planes stooping like eagles on American ships, but not dropping bombs, intentionally crashing into those ships, intentionally giving their lives so that the Americans on those ships can die, and so that those ships might be damaged or even destroyed. As we get closer to the Japanese home islands, the intensity of the kamikaze increases. In early 1945, while fighting is still going on in Europe, American forces, actually, one other thing about the way the Japanese handle the invasion of American forces. Saipan, in the Marianas, north of Guam, is really the first time that Americans encounter large numbers of Japanese civilians. Our newsreel cameras film what happened. The Japanese had been told that they had a duty before being captured. In areas that still were not captured, that were across a bay from areas that were captured by the Americans, in living color, American newsreel cameras took pictures of Japanese mothers holding the arms of their children and babies in their arms and stepping off a 200-foot cliff into the sea. This went on for hours. The Japanese civilians, the women and children, died by suicide rather than be captured by the gaijin, the round-eyed barbarians, the Americans. Japanese soldiers, when they surrendered, often would fail to do it seriously. In other words, they would surrender, and then when they got close to Americans who were going to capture them, they'd pull the pin on a hidden grenade and blow up, killing as many Americans as possible. Or they'd draw Americans out into an ambush. So after a while, a lot of Americans stopped taking Japanese surrender because so often it was a trap. The Japanese fought with an absolute tenacity and a brutality and a disregard for their own lives that shocked the Americans. Seeing those civilians do that. So this gives you an intent, a picture. And this only got more and more intense as we got closer to the Japanese home islands. So, in early 45, we take the volcanic island with this that doesn't work. Whee! We take the volcanic island of Iwo Jima. And we then take the first of Japanese inner colonies in the Ryukyus, the island of Okinawa. In these two battles, more Americans are lost than any time, even in Guadalcanal before in the American Pacific Campaign. These islands are both set up as islands of death. And as the Marines are fighting their way through, and the army is fighting their way through the maze of death that is Iwo Jima and then Okinawa, hundreds of Japanese pilots every day, as they complete their training, would have a special night of meditation and prayer, which might include a geisha. The next morning, they would write their death poem. They would clip their fingernails, put them in a sandalwood box, because those are the only things that would survive. They would put the death poem. They would go out. They would put a bandana with parts of their death poem on it, and the rising sun, or maybe the chrysanthemum of the emperor. They would speak their death poem, drink a ceremonial glass of sake, Japanese rice wine, and they would board their planes and take off. Over the coast of Japan, they would form what is called a kikusui, a flying chrysanthemum. And these chrysanthemums would head out to the American invasion forces at Iwo Jima or Okinawa or at the American carriers when they were raiding off the coasts of Japan. These flying chrysanthemums would then find the American carriers. Their first goal would be to sink a carrier. In, I think it was the Battle of Okinawa, Kamikaze Tommy Zai went in an almost vertical dive down and hit the USS Enterprise so hard that his plane burrowed through the hole for the forward elevator. The elevator itself was blown 1,000 foot into the air. There's a photograph of the elevator hovering above the Enterprise. And his plane ends up at the very bottom of the ship. Wreckage of it does. He doesn't survive, obviously. He's dead. He's a kamikaze. If they can't get a aircraft carrier, they'll get a battleship, or a heavy cruiser, or a light cruiser, or a destroyer, or a merchant ship, or something, anything. These Kikusui do not operate the way our anti-aircraft system is designed to work. Our anti-aircraft system is designed to deal with a plane that's weaving and bobbing and trying to drop its bomb and then pull off and trying to survive. But instead, what these kamikaze do is they go at maximum speed straight in. And it's very hard to hit them because they're presenting minimal aspect. They're not weaving around. The mathematics that operate that guide our mechanical computers that operate our anti-aircraft system are not designed for this. And they're coming in so boom! It's over before our people have a chance to stop them. The kamikaze kills more Americans and sinks more American warships than anything in the history of the United States Navy. But it's not just the aircraft. There's the Baka bomb, which means crazy. And the Baka bomb is a rocket with a man in it. It's a guided missile. Guy gets in, the Baka bomb is dropped from an aircraft, the rocket motor engages, and it comes in at rocket speeds and hits the aircraft carrier or the battleship or the cruiser or the destroyer. Then there are the Kaiten. Kaiten are manned torpedoes. They're something like a small midget submarine filled to the gills with explosives with cordite. Japanese pilot gets into the submarine, leaves the mother ship or the mother submarine usually, puts their periscope up, boop, 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 okay. And when they think they have the target right, they hit their engines and they come in like a torpedo and they guide it until it hits. The Japanese are spending their people with increasing intensity as we get closer. The biggest kamikaze of all is the battleship Yamato, which survived the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which is sent on a one-way mission to Okinawa to beach itself off of Okinawa and die shooting at the Americans, killing as many Americans as possible. This is the greatest battleship ever built, bigger and scarier than anything the United States Navy ever produces. We spot it about halfway there, and we sink it with aircraft. The legend of Yamato is so strong, it's one of the bases of Japan's first anime, Uchu Senkan Yamato, Space Battleship Yamato, because Yamato is named after the first Japanese empire. So the Japanese are becoming more and more intense as we get closer to their homeland. As we plan for Operation Olympic, the invasion of the South Island of Kyushu, and then Operation Operation Downfall, which is the landings on Honshu, the main Japanese island. The estimate is that the war will take at least 3 or 4 more years. That in the early phases of invasion, America will lose 1 million dead. Not casualties. Dead! Tens of millions of casualties. 1 million dead. The Russians will have to come in through Sakhalin and Hokkaido Island and land in northern Honshu. The Japanese people will be used as cannon fodder by their army, and that they will die almost as a race and as a culture in defense of their God Emperor. And there is nothing we can do to stop that. That is the planning. And the Japanese military, which runs things, is very clear that that is the planning. And that is the doomsday scenario that we're facing in the summer of 1945.